All right, guys, I'm stepping out of my historical comfort zone today. This is one of those opportunities for me personally to learn. I don't know much about this topic at all, but I recognize this is a huge hole in my historical knowledge that I need to start filling a little bit. I will never be an expert in this area, nor do I intend to be. But I want to learn a little bit about the history of India. It's the second most populous country on earth. It is the most populous democracy on earth. It's one of the most ancient civilizations in the world. Deep roots of history. And I confess, like a lot of Westerners, don't know a lot about it. We aren't taught a ton in the United States. And I'll be honest, I don't know much. When I think of India, I think of a lot of people, crowded cities. I think of Gandhi. I think of the caste system. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a part of our culture. There's the whole Bollywood thing. But honestly, that is not an accurate picture of what India is. And so I want to learn more. So I'm going to put a link in the description. This is the channel Knowledgia. I wasn't sure where to go for a history of India. I was browsing around. I was looking for a video that had a lot of views, that seemed to come from a decent sized channel, so I could kind of trust the material a little bit. But I'm going to rely on a lot of you who do know this topic well to help fill in the gaps, to help catch any mistakes that might exist, because we want to be accurate in our information. And as always, please provide some kind of a source. Anytime you post anything with a link, YouTube's going to automatically filter that out, so it's not going to immediately post. But I do go in and check those, and I will approve those comments. It's just a way of keeping from like the porn links and stuff that end up getting posted. So please do that. If you provide information to refute something that's said, or to provide more information, please either let us know where to find it, or post a link and I'll approve it when I can. So let's dive into the history of India. I'll try to add what I can, try to see some parallels in other parts of history, but I'm here to learn. We're here to learn together. So join me as we do that.
The history of India is filled with incredible stories of thriving civilizations, religions, and cultures. Dating all the way back to the Paleolithic age, India's civilization is one of the oldest that we know and has played a part on the world stage for centuries, and even still today. While it is impossible to truly capture all of India's history in one video, it still serves as a worthy topic to delve into. Evidence of cave paintings and stone tools have revealed that the first signs of human activity in India can be traced back to somewhere between 400,000 and 200,000 BC. Details concerning the civilizations inhabiting the region back that long ago do not exist, but we do know that one of the first sophisticated societies to walk the lands of India was the Harappan people.
So just by way of kind of an overview here, we talk about this time period as being prehistoric because it's before there's written history. It's before people started writing stuff down. So unfortunately, anything before about 6,000 years ago is what we would really kind of consider prehistory. It's only about that time, about 6,000 years ago, that we start writing down history. So regardless of how old you feel the earth is and what your beliefs are and things like that, we can all agree that we start to get written history about that time. So I don't know exactly where that'll tie into Indian history, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Who likely existed throughout the first few thousand years BC. Positioned along the Indus River, the Harappan people had their own writing system, advanced social and economic system, and impressive urban cities and architecture.
So this guy's like the opposite of Cody from Alternate History Hub, where Cody I think that's his name, Cody, isn't it? He has a soft T on everything, so instead of saying Britain, he says Britain. This guy's the opposite. He's like Brit, he gives a really hard T. So just a kind of a random observation. Yeah, Indus Valley civilization is kind of what I think of when I think of the earliest parts of India. But I really don't know anything about it. I just know that it existed. So I'm excited to learn about this.
It is unknown why this civilization collapsed around 1500 BC, but some attribute their demise to the common floods and other natural disasters in the region, or potentially invaders from Western and Central Asia. The next known civilization to leave a mark on Indian history books was the Vedic Aryans. These people were initially migrants who spoke an early form of Sanskrit and were determined to stay true to their own tribal identity. The name they've been given, the Vedic people, comes from 4 sacred texts, or Vedas, that have presented researchers with a glimpse into this civilization's lives and beliefs.
So here's where we start to get real written history, and this stuff's so great. And one of the things, just completely off topic, well, not completely off topic, but one of the things that's important for us to do when we're considering historic texts is how old is the earliest copy that we have, and how close to when the original was written is that copy. You know, a lot of things that we have, like Homer, for example, the written copies that we have of Homer are long distance from when they were originally written. And so, you know, everything had to be copied by hand. And so a lot of the copies that we have of things are like many generations of copies later. And when you copy something, you make mistakes. There are transcription errors. There are little additions or subtractions that get made by the copyist. And so the closer we get to the original in terms of the copies, the more accurate we can trust it to be, because there haven't been those generations of copyists who have gotten their grubby hands on it.
These Vedas are often considered to be the oldest Hindu scripts, and the Vedic civilization is believed to have spread their culture across a large portion of India by roughly 1000 BC.
So they're starting to make some references to Hinduism, and I believe that Hinduism, the word itself, is actually an exonym. I don't think it's one that's actually used by the Hindu people of India. I could be wrong about that. Please correct me if that's the case. But it's very interesting to see how, like many cultures, the religious aspect and the secular aspect are going to be kind of hand in hand. And Hinduism is going to be a big part of the identity of the culture that is developing here as Hinduism itself develops. It's one of the largest religions in the world. I think probably next largest after Christianity and Islam. And I think the vast majority of people in India are Hindu. So I'll be interested to see how that all ties into the history of India.
With them, the Vedic Aryans brought their philosophical beliefs. These ideas represent a theory that happiness and salvation come from a person's morals and ethics, and one's path should be based upon their place in life, but should always be righteous and good. The Vedic Aryans also shared their societal system as they extended their reach. This system was made up originally of 3 tiers: Brahmin, or priest, Kshatriya, or warrior, and Vaishya, or commoner.
Not all that different on the surface than what we see in a lot of other cultures. You know, you see in a lot of Western cultures, you know, the idea of the priesthood being kind of its own class of people. You know, and you have varying degrees of what this looks like, but I'm guessing this is kind of the beginnings of the caste system. But you have forms of this kind of thing happening in many cultures.
The Aryans continued to spread their tribal settlements across India throughout the following centuries as their own civilization grew and flourished in both culture and trade. A series of 16 individual settlements or states spanned across northern India, including the Gandhara, Kosala, Kuru, and the Magadh. The latter particularly flourished under the rule of Chandragupta Maurya during the 4th century BC.
So we're all the way up to the 4th century BC already. And, you know, it's just interesting to think about what's happening in the rest of the world right now. Well, we're getting close to the time of Alexander the Great, who's going to be pushing right up to the borders of this area and is going to almost like make his way into India. He tries to anyway. So we're going to see that kind of European culture starting to press up against now Indian. And then, of course, to the east of here, you've got China, you've got Southeast Asia, you've got Japan, and everything that's going on in those areas. This is a time when the Roman Empire is starting to grow. So just kind of fascinating to see how this all grows at the time that those other things are happening.
As it began to expand, and its leader grew his own authority.
And before you say it, I know there was no Roman Empire yet. I'm just kind of using that term, Rome.
Worked to form the Mauryan Empire, which is believed to be the first Indian imperial power.
Okay.
The Mauryan Empire established its capital in Pataliputra, near modern-day Patna, and constructed extraordinary temples, libraries, palaces, and even a university.
Wow.
The empire's trade success was impressive.
This is early stuff, having universities and temples. I mean, the infrastructure here, this is advanced. This is pretty cool stuff. I'm curious to know a little bit about the rulers in this system. I don't know if they'll talk about that, but I want to look that up a little bit. So first of all, it's kind of cool to see that, like when you see a name like Chandragupta, I mean, that's kind of the types of names you expect to hear even today. It's really cool to see how early some of the names and some of the language is developing in these countries that are modern to this day. So they start consolidating land as Alexander the Great's power began to wane. So that's happening at about this time, but this only lasts for about, looks like 140 years or so. But they have writings about leadership and government, describing how states should organize its economy and maintain power. Closely resembled government of others there. I mean, this is advanced stuff. This is really cool. This is stuff I did not know was happening at this time. Pretty neat.
And it maintained a remarkable governmental system and strong army. By the time of the third emperor, the grandson of Chandragupta, a stance of non-violence was taken after a bloody struggle against the kingdom of Kalinga due to the emperor's new Buddhist beliefs. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, had been born in 560 BC, and by the reign of Emperor Ashoka, the religious system he had founded was becoming more and more prevalent throughout India. Potentially due to their unwillingness to participate in conflict, though, the Mauryan Empire eventually dissolved in the 2nd century BC after the last line of the Maurya line, Brihadratha, was murdered by his commander-in-chief, who would later found the Shunga dynasty.
So, nonviolence is a fantastic ideal to aspire to. It's terrible for running an empire. When you are holding to a idea of nonviolence and none of the other people around you are, they will very quickly take advantage of you, and that is unfortunately the reality for anybody who goes down that path. It's greatly admired, to be able to take a path of nonviolence. It's not the way to run an empire, though, unfortunately.
In 185 BC, despite the fact that Brihadratha's assassin Pushyamitra was rumored to have persecuted Buddhists, it appeared that Buddhism faced no decline concurrent with his rise to power. During Pushyamitra's reign, his kingdom maintained authority over a series of provinces as he stood his ground against other powers attempting to expand their territory towards his own.
So it's interesting to note that these empires are mostly in the northern part of what is today India, because we know that India goes all the way down into here. So there's obviously a very different system of government, a very different group of people in the south, and I'm curious to know how that eventually all will merge together.
After the monarch's death, though, his dynasty seemed to have fallen in terms of importance. The dynasty is not known to have done anything notably relevant, and their control was short-lived. A variety of settlements and invading powers controlled India at this time, one being the Kushana kingdom, known for their significant trade involvement with Chinese, Persian, and Roman empires along the Silk Road. One Kushana ruler, Kanishka, in the 1st century AD, also converted to Buddhism and helps to further the religion throughout the region.
And you can see how, just like in the West with Christianity, with Islam, how religion fuels the spread of these empires. It fuels what alliances get made. It fuels what ambitions people have.
In 75 AD, the Kushana kingdom marked a new era, the Shaka era. A bit of distance from the Kushanas in the south,
Here we go.
A handful of other powers rose, fell, and fought for supremacy amongst each other. The kingdoms of Satavahana, Chera, Chola, and Pandya were some of the major authorities in the south during this time and through the Classical Age. The Gupta Empire became the face of northern India during the Classical Age, and the majority of the region was united under their authority during what is often described as northern India's Golden Age. The reign of the Gupta Empire is regarded as a time of law and order, as well as cultural flourishing. The rulers of the empire were no strangers to military expedition, but aimed to expand their territory through peaceful means, such as martial alliances, no less than through military action.
So I'm curious to know, because we know India's got such a high population today, over 1 billion people. I'm curious to know what the population is like during this time. So I want to look that up. So first of all, this is interesting here. At the beginning of the 4th century, the world population is estimated at around 375 million people, and 80% of that population is either in the Roman, the Chinese Han, or the Indian Gupta empires. If you lived in the world 1,600 years ago, 1,700 years ago, 4 out of 5 were in one of those 3 empires. I mean, that just goes to show you how dominant that a part of the world is. But I want to find a little more than that. So the Gupta Empire, 350 to 450 is the time period we're talking. They control an area of about 1.4 million square miles. But we don't get an idea of a population from that. So I'm curious to see if we can find that anywhere else. All right, well, I don't want to spend all day looking for it. I couldn't really find anything easily, but if you can provide some kind of a source for what kind of population we're looking at for the Gupta Empire at this time, I would love to hear that, so please post it below.
Though the Gupta Empire had extensive success over centuries, they eventually reached a point of decline between the 5th and 6th centuries as invading Huns from Central Asia began to annex and take over the formerly dominant empire's land.
And anytime you have these other empires coming in, invasions by other groups of people, you're going to have a mixing of cultures, you're going to have a mixing of bloodlines, genetics. And so that's why today, for example, if you live in England, you might have Scandinavian roots in your DNA. You might have German DNA. You might have French DNA. You might have Celtic DNA. You know, because there are all these, every time there's an invasion by one of these groups of people or a new settlement, they get kind of mixed in, and you add to the culture. And so the culture changes and the language changes. And all of this, no doubt, is having an impact on forming what we know today as India.
As the religions of Buddhism and what later became Hinduism thrived, local and trespassing authorities continued to fight for territory and dominion over the following centuries. The next major shakeup of the Indian civilization came with the arrival of Islam. Muslim invaders began to send missions to India the century after the death of the Prophet Muhammad.
And so it's interesting because we know that they're also spreading to the west, right? I mean, they're spreading across Africa. They're moving into southeastern Europe. They're moving up the Iberian Peninsula. So, you know, when we learn about European history, we learn about those things. But while that's all happening, they're also spreading to the east.
A series of Muslim sultans began to lead expeditions into India, claiming places such as Sindh, Multan, and Somnath. These incursions brought the defeat of native kingdoms and the destruction of Hindu temples along the way. The Rajputs stood as one of the most determined defenders against Sultan invaders, but they were ultimately defeated in 1192 by Muhammad Ghori and his forces. As Islam began to work its way into India, other previously principal religions, such as Buddhism, began to decline. By the start of the 13th century, the era of the Delhi Sultanate dominion arose.
So again, it's interesting. It's always that kind of northern area that becomes the largest empire, or the largest group under one rule.
First dynasty within the Delhi Sultanate was founded by Qutb ud-Din Aibak. The slave dynasty controlled the sultanates until around 1290, when the Khilji dynasty took over, first by the hand of Jahal-ud-Din Khilji. His family held the throne for less than a century, as the Tughlaq dynasty was next to seize power in 1320. The Tughlaq dynasty technically retained power until 1412, but matters were complicated by the...
So, I mean, this is most of modern India at this point, and it's a good bit of Pakistan too. Fascinating.
The incursion led by Timur in 1398 into Delhi. As the Tughlaq dynasty weakened, the Sayyid dynasty replaced them, starting in 1414. The Sayyids lasted for roughly 37 years, but the last ruler's reign was stained by rebellion and discord as the dynasty fell from grace. Yet another dynastic authority took the open throne, this time being the Lodi dynasty. The new dynasty lasted until the death of the then current ruler, Ibrahim Khan Lodi, who was killed in battle at Panipat by the army of Kabul's leader Babur in 1526.
Kabul being part of Afghanistan today.
Death brought about the final end of the Delhi Sultanate as a whole. Now free of competition from the Lodi dynasty, Babur established the Mughal dynasty, which would end up becoming one of the greatest throughout history.
Look at that.
The original Turkic-Mongol imperial power ruled a vast majority of India for over 2 centuries and brought about significant cultural growth and architectural achievements, including the Great Taj Mahal.
Yep.
Despite their immense success, the Mughal Empire began its decline around the start of the 18th century, as revolt after revolt began to shake the foundations of the widespread power.
So you're getting revolts against a once powerful empire, weakening it from the inside. This is the perfect opportunity in any civilization for an outside power to take advantage and come in, and I have a feeling I know who that outside power is.
Alongside threats from the Marathas and the British. The British East India
There
Company had actually already been in the region for some time, but the situation with the British started to escalate not long after the Mughals fell. By 1857, India displayed increasing control by the East India Company, and the locals were having none of it.
Look at that. Just like that. After centuries of local or somewhat local rule, here comes an empire from, halfway across the world. And interesting little tidbit, American history, we learn about Lord Cornwallis, who famously surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown, which kind of brought him an effective end to the American Revolution. He's buried in India. He was sent to India. I think he was kind of the governor or something there, and died and is buried in the British Empire.
It began as a simple revolt by Indian soldiers in Meerut, quickly blew up into a widespread rebellion and became known as the Indian Mutiny of 1857. This rebellion later would be called the First War of Indian Independence, and even though the British were able to quell the revolt after a matter of months, it inevitably had lasting impacts. In response to the mutiny, on November 1st, 1858, Britain's Queen Victoria declared that India would be ruled in the name of the British Crown from that point on. Locals maintained their disapproval and anger at the British supremacy over their land.
And now Queen Victoria is going to be called the Empress of India, and that's a title that will pass down to her son, who will be the Emperor of India, Edward. And then, at least for a few more generations, I think it's only when, I want to say King George VI gives up that title.
And nationalist sentiments and movements were far from extinguished. The next major move towards independence came when Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress decided to withdraw all cooperation with the British government, beginning the non-cooperation movement following the end of World War I.
It's a fascinating way to rebel. It's not an active rebellion. It's not armed and violent. It's we're not going to help you anymore. We're not cooperating. It's a peaceful but effective tool, because the British Empire can only do so much from that far away when they've got a bunch of other places that they've got to deal with as well. in such a massive population and a massive area, they've got to have cooperation. So the more you can get the Indian people to not cooperate, the more effective that's going to become.
When this strategy did not bring the wanted results, Gandhi adopted a new technique in the form of the civil disobedience movement in December of 1929. Essentially, the movement was made up of the declaration of an Indian Independence Day that would be celebrated on January 16th, and complete disobedience of any orders by the British government. Again, Gandhi's strategy failed, and this time he was even arrested, while many other rebels were murdered. Still, the British were eventually pushed into the Round Table Conferences beginning in November of 1930, the second of which Gandhi attended. The conferences marked another failure, and civil disobedience reignited. Gandhi's next attempt, the Quit India movement, again made no drastic progress.
So again, it's pretty interesting here that he's trying these nonviolent means. He's trying to find ways without open rebellion to push for independence, and it's not working. And when these things happen, eventually you're going to have more extreme people who are going to say, your way's not working. We've got to try something different. You always have a variety of people trying different things. In the American Revolution, for the people that you have that are trying to find a olive branch, a peaceful solution, you also have the Sam Adams of the world who are much more about violence and really kind of being active with it. In the civil rights movement here in the United States, we have people like Martin Luther King Jr., who are very much about peace and civil disobedience, much like Gandhi. And then you have the Malcolm X's of the world, who are much more about being active and being much more forceful in fighting for things.
World War II brought about new issues as India was forced into war by the British. But at the conflict's conclusion, a new Labour Party came into power in India and showed sympathy towards the fight for independence. Finally, as August 14th turned to 15th in 1947, India became an independent nation.
Okay, so that's the end of that first part. I don't know if there's a second part to this. It says part 1, so there probably is. I'll put the link in the description so you can check this out for yourself without my commentary. I learned a lot already. Obviously, we glossed over a ton of history because we're covering thousands of years in a 12-minute video, so there's not a lot of details, but we will definitely dive into more. I'm just trying to get my feet wet. I'm trying to wrap my mind around a little bit more of Indian history so I can start to get a sense of it. And so if you have suggestions, ideas, requests of specific videos that get more into the details of Indian history, I would love to hear that. This is an area I don't know much about, like I said. So thanks for watching. Please hit that like button. We'll come back with part 2 if it does indeed exist.